This show does not provide medical advice. If you're having a medical emergency, please call 911. If anything you hear here should be discussed with your primary health care provider. Hello, and welcome to Everyone Dies, the radio show, produced by Passionate World Talk Radio, whose goal it is to educate, enlighten, and entertain. I'm Marianne Matson. For the next 30 minutes, I am your host. Today we're going to be talking about doulas, spelled D-O-U-L-A, and you might be wondering, well, what the heck is that? Well, the doulas were traditionally used in the birthing process. They either alone or with the obstetrician worked with the family in terms of the birth process, sometimes before, sometimes after, but that whole kind of healthy birth. And then it's sort of been added to the dying process. And so I thought today would be a good day to talk with a doula. And today we have with us Linda Barnard, who is a gerontological nurse practitioner, so she's a nurse. She has her doctorate in nursing practice. And then in 2020, she decided that she wanted to become certified as an end-of-life doula. So Linda, welcome to Everyone Dies.
Thanks, Marianne. I'm happy to be here this morning.
So I know I gave like a very brief definition of like what a doula is, but when you talk to your patients and you tell them that you're an end-of-life doula, what do you tell them? What is your definition?
Yeah, so I say it's a person that sort of walks alongside them at a challenging time in their life. It doesn't have to be right at death. It can actually be sooner, maybe when an illness is progressing or when someone has a new diagnosis or changes are coming. They usually will have a team in place. Often they're in palliative care and then later hospice care. So they're getting nurses and they're getting aides and they're getting a chaplain or maybe some volunteers. But end-of-life doula sort of fills in the gap. They provide extra care. They are a non-medical person. That's an important part to understand, that even though I'm a nurse, I don't do any nursing skills because they already have a nurse, and we wouldn't want to duplicate services. They already have a nurse. So I come in as somebody who sees death as natural, as a normal process. I help patients to prepare for it, decide where they may want to be, who they might want to be there, what the environment might be important to them, to talk about unfinished business or things in their life that they want to sort of complete. And I also help with support. So you can't really do this by yourself. So I'll help them to tap into any support if they want community support or through a church or religious organization or some volunteer capacity so that they don't go through it alone. And then I also help them with planning. We do some legacy work, looking at their life, finding the value, affirming who they were and what they've done, and plan for a memorial. I don't do that. That's a separate work in the funeral industry, but to say what would they want done. And often many of those things are not talked about. They're not discussed. Other people sort of make decisions, or things happen, unfortunately, pretty chaotic and urgent. Somebody might have a hospitalization, and in that hospitalization they decide they're not going to have any more curative treatment that would prolong their life with chemotherapy or radiation or immunotherapy. And someone says, okay, well, we'll put them on hospice and send them home. And that is a really hard thing to do with no planning. So I like to get with families early if I can to plan about that process, to know what the expectations might be, know how I can help them to be ready for that, if they're ready for that, and really affirm and acknowledge and guide and support them.
So do you, let me back up a second. So, our radio show is called Everyone Dies, and our podcast is called Everyone Dies, and we just wrote a children's book called Everyone Dies. And I get messages from people saying, I love your work, but I hate your name. I hate that I see, when I'm flipping through Facebook or whatever, Everyone Dies. So do you have trouble engaging people to talk about their end of life?
That's a great question and point, and the answer is yes, 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 yes.
I have to tell you, Linda, I knew the answer to that, but how do you deal with that? What do you do?
So it depends. It depends on who I'm speaking with and what the situation is. So I try to do some community education, and even when I did that when I was practicing as a nurse practitioner, I'm not practicing as a nurse practitioner anymore. We learned early that we wouldn't put a presentation together about planning for your death because nobody would come. Mm-hmm. Nobody would come. So I've labeled mine, let's talk about it. And it can be lots of things related to end of life. It doesn't have to just be death. So in labeling myself, I label myself an end-of-life doula intentionally, not a death doula. Because death is one final breath. That's what it is. You have your last final sort of exhale, and that's it. And the care that is an end of life goes way before that and after. Before with planning and acceptance and certainly things like decline and symptoms and lots of emotional or spiritual needs ahead of time. And then afterwards is the survivors, who's left behind, and how are they processing it. And I'm not a grief counselor. I'm not trained in that by any means, but I am a good listener, and I do have a certain skill set to sort of guide them through that process. So death doula is a term that some people will use, and they call themselves death coach or a death guide or a death companion. Midwife of the Soul. There's actually a beautiful book called Midwife of the Soul. Other terms, but I sort of soften that, and I learned that in my career because long ago in my grandmother's generation, they wouldn't say the word cancer. They called it the big C. Right. And then in our world, we would have families that would say, don't call it hospice. Turn your badge around. So and you just tell them your extra layer of support, your helping hands. And I don't fight against that. I don't resist that because we meet people where they're at. And so if they're not comfortable with them, if I get a little opportunity, a little opening, I might say, so when I say that word hospice, what does that mean to you? And then I can understand what their misconception is, and or if there is one, and do a little education and clarify some of that and relieve some of those fears. Some are real and some are not. So,
well, people will say, I don't know, I don't like that hospice because everybody who goes to hospice dies. Yeah, that's sort of the point is, that you're in that last, 6 months or last period of your life. So the expectation is that you are going to die. So it's that too can be a quote unquote hard sell, and people say, I don't want anything to do with a program that's about dying. Until here's what I found, Linda, until they're faced with it, and then they say, holy schmoly, I need some information about this. And how come nobody's given me any information about this? And I worked in oncology and I worked in palliative care, and I would kind of inside my brain smile and say, we've been giving it to you from the very beginning, but either if we gave you a pamphlet or if we mentioned it, it got tucked into that side of your brain where that's where things go that I really don't want to talk about or deal with. And then when you're actually faced with it, it's like, oh, you mean it's now? I mean, I worked as a hospice nurse for about 6 years, and it just surprised me how many times people would say, you mean it's now? You mean they're dying now? Have you found that yourself?
Absolutely, and that's the whole, let me see, how does that line go? We'll deal with that when we get to it. Well, that's not what we're dealing with now, right? we'll deal with that when we get to it. And, you know, everybody, whether you're in healthcare or not, knows that that when we get to it is going to be filled with lots of important, fast, challenging questions. Mm-hmm. And so if you can do it ahead of time, run those scenarios and use circumstances like COVID or somebody else's death, you know, in your life, and use that as a sort of, you know, jumping board to jump off and have those conversations. But I think anybody who's been in the field gets sort of shut down in those conversations. But I don't. When I was working as an NP, it was different because those relationships continued in some way, and I never tried to resist it. I just tried to work with it and get a tiny opening. And if there was a little opening, to make a little move, a little shift, and meet them where they're at, address whatever that initial fear is, and then move past that if possible. In sort of public, that is a little more challenging because that relationship isn't there and able to be established. So if I try to meet someone and describe, you know, who I am or what I can offer for them, it takes a lot of conversation. In many doulas will offer like a free phone consult. Well, that 45 minutes or hour goes so fast because so much is happening, and it's usually happening really quickly and not with a lot of control. So it takes a while to build that trust up and to let them know who you are, that you're not here to, you know, run the course any different than they want. You just want to sort of present options, what's available to them, and really support them. The care that families do to take care of their loved ones, whether it be at home or in a facility, is really challenging and really admirable. And if we can help them to make it a good experience, a memorable experience, one where they feel, I did a really good job here and I'm proud of what I did. I love to be a part of that. So,
Linda, I'm curious, why did you decide to go from, you know, working as an NP and, you know, getting your DNP to then going to be the doula, where it's not in the quote-unquote professional role? Well, can you talk to me a bit about what you were thinking or what happened?
Yeah. I had a long career in nursing and loved it. Always worked in geriatrics and hospice and palliative care, and I did get a doctorate, and I was teaching and you know, did a study and on hospice and African Americans and their perceptions and attitude and knowledge, and always seeking to learn more what was happening. And then in 2017, my sister got sick. She got diagnosed with ovarian cancer. And she lived out of state, and she had 2 boys in high school, and she was going to have surgery and chemo and radiation and start a challenging course. And I resigned. I left my position to help her. And when I left, and I helped her, and I was the outsider. I was watching the system, watching all that was happening, but I wasn't watching as a nurse, even though I always say I'm a nurse to my core. But so I watched that situation and how that unfolded, and I also looked back and realized how burnt out I was, to be honest, in the work, because the work in end-of-life care can be challenging, and it's very regulated, and what you need to do in terms of documentation was becoming burdensome, and I really just wanted to be that old nurse who took care of patients. So my sister, I'm happy to say, went through a treatment and she did fine, but I had a friend right after that who was terminally ill. She was my age, and she had kids the same age as my kids, and our lives were really similar, except that hers was ending. And I walked with her, and I felt so incompetent because I could have been her nurse practitioner. I could have been in her, you know, team meetings. I could have made her plan of care. But that wasn't what I did. What I did was support anything she wanted. She wanted really aggressive care to stay alive 1, 2, 3 more days for her boys. And I watched her, and I watched the system, and I really became her doula. I didn't, she would say, hey, can you come take my blood pressure? And she just wanted companionship. There was nothing wrong with her blood pressure. And I would take it, but mostly I would just talk with her and listen with her in a way that providers can't, because they don't have that time. And they also have their own priorities in their head, things that they need to get done, meetings that are later in the day, this phone call they need to make, all the things that they had to do. And I didn't have to do that. I was available for Deb when she needed it and for her family. And it's funny because her family think I did an amazing job, and they'll tell me over and over again, I did nothing. They did it. They did it, and I helped them. I supported them. I gave them like little boosts of courage, like, you could do this. It's going to be okay. You'll be all right. This is what I think is going to happen. And it was really her that helped me to understand the role that's outside of healthcare, that doesn't have a license to it. It doesn't have credentialing to it. And so I did that, and I had other family members, and I was the person that they would call. And they would call because I was the nurse, right? We do this, right? We call upon the nurses in our families. And Barbara Carnes, who's the hospice, I'm a big fan of Barbara Carnes from hospice, and she always says, caring for the living, those people expected to survive, and caring for the dying are really different. So when you call in the nurse, that can be a really hard role for them. So, but people always called me, and I knew I had the ability to walk in a room and have it settle and have people say, oh, I'm glad Linda's here. And I wasn't going to do anything. It's just that I could sit and say, tell me what's been going on. Oh, this is what I think. This is what we can expect. Why don't you go and take a break, and I'll sit. And so that happened over and over again. And then I'd never even heard the word doula. And I had a sort of divine inspiration at church over the summer and got this idea of an end-of-life doula and looked it up, found some trainings. There's various trainings. The one I took was by a nurse, so I knew she would speak my language, and launched it, and all in a pandemic, which has been a bit of a challenge to be out and educate, the public. Mostly, I enjoy that, as well as connect with families and patients. So that's kind of the long story of how I got here. It's the work I've always done. The sweetest parts of the work I get to do, which is to be with patients and families as they need it, and not to have a task.
So if somebody wanted to hire a doula, and because we know they're not licensed, and we know they're not credentialed, and we know that there's variability in terms of the education or the certification that they'll get, how do we know if we have somebody who's going to give us, the sort of right answers and be knowledgeable? Because we've got, one birth and we have one death, right? And so as a hospice nurses, that if it goes terribly wrong, people will remember it forever, and, complicated grief and things could be very difficult for them forever. So there's that certain amount of pressure. How do you know if you're hiring somebody into that role who's not going to goof it up?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is a national organization called the National Alliance of End-of-Life Doulas. It's NEDA. And they are a professional organization. They're a nonprofit. They don't offer any trainings. They are fantastic. And so if anybody wanted to know what a doula is, how you use them, what the questions are, that website has lots of information. And it also has a directory, and you can look up doulas by state. So you can, plug in Florida and find the doulas there. From there, it takes a little bit of work, and every family wants something different. And the skill set and experience and passion of the doulas are very wide and very diverse. So there are doulas that come from medicine or from nursing or from social work or from ministry. And there are also doulas that come from all the healing arts. They come from their herbalists, or they, do any of those energetic works. They may do some Reiki. They may do some aromatherapy. And so it depends what you're looking for. And you can look on the website. They have the directory. And on the website, you can read through the doulas. And most will have a website. You can read sort of the story. You can get a feel for them. Many will offer a free consultation, so you can call and ask your questions. Is this appropriate? I get a lot of calls that don't lead to anything more, but I educate them. Mm-hmm. And then finally, there is, as you said, Marianne, there's not a national exam that everybody takes. There's not a credentialing body, and there's not a licensing body. But there is, NIDA has put together a proficiency badge. So, and they did that to sort of bring up a reputation so that we could present ourselves to people in healthcare and to families as we have taken this exam and we're proficient. And we know there's core competencies and there's ethics and a scope of practice. And so if you take the exam and pass, you can put the little badge on there. So if I were looking, I might look for that badge. Not everybody has to take the badge, and not everybody has to take a training. You could actually call yourself an end-of-life doula and have been a hospice nurse for 30 years and never taken a training, but you certainly know end-of-life care. So that would be the way that I would say. There's different training programs that also have directories, but the National End-of-Life Doula Alliance is a terrific organization, and they've done a lot of work, and they have a lot of good free education about what a doula is, and so they can find it on there. And then you hire based on whether it's a match. It's a match for your family and what you're looking for. And because the customer does the hiring, if it doesn't work, then they don't need to continue. Like hiring home health. You could do it within an agency, but you can also hire on your own as well.
So, Linda, do you have any final thoughts, any final things you'd like to share?
Well, the only thing would be that I am encouraged, your question about hospice and could this ever be a normal part of care, I am encouraged with this whole sort of death-positive movement that we're talking about it more, we're speaking about it more. We have more opportunities to learn, whether it's from, Everyone Dies or other resources out there for those people that are interested, for those people who, and those are the listeners.
Right.
They're already naturally drawn to it. But for the people that don't, I just am hopeful that we will continue this movement and talk about it in a non-fearful, matter-of-fact way, and with some gentleness, and I am hopeful. I'm hopeful that things will change and a little bit go back to the way it used to be. Right? Used to be we cared for the dying at home, and many cultures still do it. Many cultures care for the dying at home, even care for the body and have those home funerals, which is outside of a doula role, but that I'm hopeful will swing the pendulum back from care being in an institution and very medicalized, that we'll swing it back to just care.
Well, pendulums swing, and I like you stay in a field long enough, you see how it's this way and then it's that way and then it goes back. So hopefully, with the work that you're doing, Linda, and our work at Everyone Dies, and everyone else that's starting to say we need to normalize death, it'll make some difference. So Linda, I really so appreciate you being on the show and sharing your wisdom with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marian. It was a privilege. Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners who spent time with us during the show, Everyone Dies. You can read our blogs and listen to our other podcasts at everyonedies.org. That's EVERY, dies.org. Thank you to our producer, Jeannie White, and our CEO, Lillian Caldwell. We produce a new show every Wednesday to answer your questions related to life-threatening illness, dying, and death. Remember, you can listen to Passionate World Talk Radio on Spreaker and our shows wherever you listen to podcasts. If you have a topic you'd like to discuss on our show, please email me, Marianne at everyonedies.org. That's MARIANNE at EVERY, dies.org. I hope that you live your best life every day. And remember, every day is a gift. Thank you for listening.